The first shocks begin quietly, almost invisibly, the moment Americans observe how ordinary life in Australia bends toward a different rhythm. Morning arrives not with the hunched urgency of commuter traffic, but with a kind of wide-open ease. Streets fill slowly, cafés spill sunlight onto the sidewalks, and even the busiest neighborhoods feel as though someone has turned the emotional volume down. It's here that the first contrast takes shape, a country that moves with intention rather than acceleration, and for Americans accustomed to momentum as a default state, this slower current feels strangely disorienting. What stands out first is the atmosphere around small routines. Australians linger over their coffee, not because time is abundant, but because the culture assumes that a moment of pause belongs to everyone. Baristas chat casually with customers, creating a line that seems to move at half speed, yet no one appears impatient. The tone is light, unhurried, unconcerned with micro-efficiency. For Americans raised on rapid service and transactional pace, the stillness inside these everyday gestures feels both comforting and unfamiliar, as if the country itself refuses to be rushed. As the days unfold, the differences sharpen. People greet each other with a casual warmth that never tilts into formality. A simple "how you going" carries none of the scripted politeness that Americans often expect, but instead reflects a culture grounded in openness without obligation. Yet beneath this friendliness lies a noticeable emotional restraint. Australians rarely overshare, rarely escalate enthusiasm, rarely push conversation beyond what feels natural. What appears easygoing on the surface reveals a deeper social balance, approachable but measured. Many Americans find this combination puzzling, welcomed effortlessly into light banter, but held at a respectful distance when it comes to deeper familiarity. Even the sensory environment reinforces these differences. Public spaces feel louder with birdsong than human chatter. The magpie's warble at dawn feels more present than any city noise. Beaches fill early with swimmers and joggers embracing the morning cool before the sun intensifies. Outdoor life is not an occasional leisure activity, but a daily expectation, shaped by a climate that rewards those who rise early and slow down before the heat peaks. Americans often remark on how naturally Australians weave nature into their routines, not as a weekend escape, but as a constant companion that shapes the texture of each day. Then there are the small habits that seem almost symbolic. Walking barefoot on grass without hesitation, hanging laundry outside instead of using a dryer, referring to the afternoon as arvo, and shortening nearly every word as if language itself prefers a relaxed posture. Even the culture around driving feels different, more patient, less territorial, with an unspoken understanding that the road is a shared space rather than a personal battlefield. These details accumulate until a pattern emerges, a society that chooses simplicity over speed, ease over intensity, presence over performance. For Americans, these shifts often create a quiet sense of cultural vertigo. The familiar structures of life, work, socializing, daily errands follow a script they recognize, yet each line is delivered differently, with a tone that challenges their assumptions about productivity, friendliness, and personal space. It's here, in the subtle contrast between expectation and reality, that the feeling takes shape. Australia is not a distant mirror of the United States. It is a place where the ordinary behaves just differently enough to reveal an entirely new emotional landscape. Over time, the cultural differences embedded in daily interactions begin to reveal themselves with greater clarity. Many Americans notice how Australians navigate social life with a distinct blend of humor, informality, and emotional modesty. Compliments are offered sparingly, achievements are downplayed, and any hint of self-importance is met with gentle teasing. This quiet enforcement of humility flows from an unspoken cultural principle. No one should rise too far above the group. It shapes everything from workplace dynamics to neighborhood gatherings, creating an atmosphere where confidence is acceptable, but grandstanding is not. For Americans, who often grow up encouraged to stand out and self-promote, this subtle pressure to blend in can feel both grounding and restrictive. Work culture deepens this impression. Offices empty out the moment the clock strikes 5, and colleagues disappear into evenings reserved for family, friends, or simply quiet time. The idea of staying late is seen less as commitment and more as a worrying sign that someone has lost balance. This shift alters how Americans interpret productivity. In Australia, discipline is measured not by overextension, but by stability, how well one can keep work in its place. Many find that this mindset softens the edges of their ambition, replacing urgency with a steadier rhythm that prioritizes life beyond the office walls. Even grocery shopping carries traces of this cultural logic. Prices are higher, selection is smaller, and there is little emphasis on bulk convenience. Yet the food itself often feels fresher, more seasonal, more connected to the outdoors, that Australians move through so naturally. Weekend markets hum with the same relaxed pace found everywhere else, people lingering at stalls, talking with growers, choosing quality over quantity, without an air of indulgence. These choices, repeated week after week, shape an environment where consumption is intentional rather than impulsive. Daily transportation patterns also reflect the country's relationship with space and time. Commuters expect delays caused by storms, heat, or coastal winds. Roads in rural areas curve through open stretches where wildlife crossings are a legitimate concern, not a rare surprise. Even in major cities, pedestrians wait patiently for crosswalk signals, as if the culture collectively agreed that a few extra seconds are not worth fighting. For Americans accustomed to speed and efficiency as moral virtues, this patience can feel bewildering at first, until it slowly becomes a kind of relief. Then comes the role of nature, unavoidable, unpredictable, and profoundly influential. The sunlight grows intense by mid-morning, pushing outdoor plans into early hours. Beaches are stunning but demand respect, with riptides and marine life serving as reminders that beauty and danger coexist. The wildlife that fills backyards and parks reshapes how people move through ordinary spaces. Australians learn these rhythms early, developing a calm awareness that guides their habits. For Americans, this coexistence with an environment that cannot be controlled reshapes their understanding of daily life. Nature is not scenery here. It is a participant, a force that commands attention and humility. These everyday encounters, repeated in small doses, begin to form a coherent picture. Australia's cultural habits, its slower pace, modest humour, deference to balance, and closeness to nature create a lifestyle that feels lighter, yet more deliberate. They challenge the assumption that speed equals success, and that productivity must eclipse presence. Many Americans find themselves shifting without realizing it, absorbing the cadences of a country that treats time as something to be honored rather than conquered. And it's within this steady recalibration that the deeper transformation begins, shaping not just how life is lived, but how life is understood. As weeks turn into months. These habits create a quiet turning point. Many Americans begin to notice how their own rhythms soften in response to Australia's gentler pace. The constant vigilance that once shaped their days fades as they adjust to a culture where trust is assumed rather than earned through performance. Even the emotional climate changes them. Conversations feel lighter, but more sincere, unburdened by the urgency to impress. The absence of pressure reveals something unexpected. Space to breathe. Work no longer defines identity with the same intensity. Leisure becomes legitimate rather than guilty. Sundays stretch wider. Weeknights settle into a calm that feels almost foreign at first. And in that space, people rediscover parts of themselves that the American pace had pushed as a curiosity, quiet, stillness. Nature amplifies this shift. The ocean becomes a place not just to visit, but to reset. Walks at dusk slow the mind. Even the sun, harsh and demanding, creates rituals of care that anchor the day. These routines build a kind of emotional resilience that doesn't rely on speed, achievement, or comparison. Over time, what once felt strange becomes the new baseline. The humility in conversation, the balance between work and life, The respect for time and environment reshapes perspective. Many Americans find that Australia's habits don't simply teach them how Australians live. They reveal new ways of living altogether. And when they finally look back at their old routines, the contrast becomes unmistakable. The noise, the rush, the constant striving seem distant compared to the steadier cadence they've learned to follow. In that realization emerges a quiet insight. Sometimes a culture feels strange, because it lacks something, but because it has held on to something others have forgotten.